Paula than the Piki Injilumba, Paul Willem Yuba, Paul Williams, and Yama Tangakol Kevachimjuba, Kunzu colleague, Paul Williams, Injilumba.
Your Holiness, this morning we have been speaking about the modes of attention, but still there is not quite a clear understanding of what attention really is. And we hope that we can elucidate now what attention is from at least the Pali canon side. And we're very fortunate to have Professor Rupert Gethin here. He's from the University Buddhist Studies of Bristol, and he's also the president of the Pali Text Society. And he has written many articles and a wonderful book as an introduction to Buddhism, which is extremely accessible for Westerners particularly, to understand what is actually the thought of Buddhism. And I'm really excited to listen now to Rupert's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diego. It's a great honor for me to be invited and to talk to Your Holiness. I find myself in a very odd position trying to explain Buddhism to you. That is
But historically, Pali is something like foundation. The Sanskrit tradition, I think, sun. So we mainly belongs to the
Sanskrit.
So when preparing my talk, I took some confidence that I would be talking about Theravada Buddhism and not Indo-Tibetan Buddhism. But then as I prepared my talk, when I started, I thought, yes, I understand these things quite well. And then I started thinking about them more in the context of this dialogue. And I thought, actually, I'm not sure that I understand this. It's quite difficult. One of the problems, it seems to me, in the dialogue between science and Buddhism with regard to the understanding of the mind and attention is that the discussion is usually carried out in English, and we use English words for Buddhist concepts, but sometimes these terms are not very well or precisely defined. So this afternoon, what I want to try to do is to look at the Theravada understanding of what might be broadly called attention, the kinds of things that Anne Treisman was talking about this morning. So I want to look at the Theravada understanding of some of the technical terms and see if we can at least get a clearer idea of how the Theravada tradition defines these terms. I think a lot is in common with Indo-Tibetan Buddhism, but also some differences. And sometimes the differences are instructive. They sharpen the understanding of things. So.
I think actually, in the reality, Indo-Tibetan Buddhist tradition, actually a combination of Sanskrit and Pali. So if we make sort of distinction, Pali tradition and Indo-Tibetan tradition, I think it may create confusion. So that, like Abhidhamma mainly, the real source is Pali tradition. Except, and also there are Devaso Association in Europe.
Also, there are texts that belong to the different sub-schools of Vaibhashika tradition.
당아주 동균 패진 때부터 조체 시기 여름마다 가자 패진 시도지 보면 때부터 조치 시기 여름 뒤에마다 신야 대바신다가 중들이 한데 패진 가시 여름 패진 여름 제가 이제 이전에 다 Nalanda tradition, those Nalanda master, I think they also top scholar of Pali. And on top of that, top scholar of Sanskrit.
Sarvastivada. So His Holiness' point is that although the monastic lineage that the Tibetans inherited is that of Sarvastivada tradition, but within the texts that are studied, there are also texts that belong to the other sub-schools of Vaibhashikas, not just Sarvastivada.
So Pali tradition there. So into Tibetan tradition,
Yes.
Pali tradition included.
Yes.
So that the Ayawachet.
Anyway, what the definitions that I will talk about today come only from Theravada Pali texts.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay. So just to give a quick outline of what I will talk about. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the mental factors involved in simple awareness according to Theravada Buddhism, these Chaitasakas. Then I want to talk about mental factors involved in more complex kinds of awareness. Then I'm going to talk a little bit, I hope, about Buddhism and tightrope walking.
You will explain later, yeah.
Yeah. And maybe then I will talk about 4 courses of awareness as they are understood in Theravada Buddhism. This will become clearer later. And finally, maybe a little bit about Buddhism and map making maps.
Would you explain what you mean by map making?
How to make a map of when we go out in a city or in a country we don't know, we need a map. And in a way, I think the Buddhist understanding, maybe even the scientific understanding, is a bit like a map of the mind.
Yeah.
Right.
So, first of all, simple awareness. So, the most simple kind of awareness that there is, according to Theravada Buddhism, has this name citta. So, citta is defined very simply as consciousness of an object. That's all that seems to be said. But as in the Vaibhashika tradition, this consciousness of an object cannot occur in isolation. It always occurs with other mental factors.
Yeah.
Siri.
Number
So the the most simple kind of awareness in Theravada Buddhism involves citta and at least 7 other factors. They give a list of 7. We mentioned this yesterday. So the factors are quite familiar. In fact, all of them are mentioned in Sarvastivada sources, but not all of them are considered universal to all consciousness. So the factors are consciousness plus contact, pasa, sparsha, feeling, vedana, perception, sanjna, willing or volition, chaitana, one-pointedness, chittaikagrata, life, jivatindriya, and then attention, we say for the moment, manaskara.
So how does the tradition define jiva indriya?
Jiva. This was one of the ones that I was not going to talk about. A difficult question for me. I think it is simply a mental counterpart to the physical counterpart. So some kind of matter has to have jivatindriya. In the Theravada system, they also say that the mind needs jivatindriya to be alive in some way. That is, so it is what makes consciousness alive.
Yeah, okay.
It sustains it.
This is the son change. Maria Thomas입니다. son change. And says Carson, so
In
really enjoy the sort of lukewarm.
In Abhidhamma Kosha, Jiva Indriya is, defined as life force. And, what is a life force? It's the basis of warmth and consciousness.
Okay.
His Holiness said it's very vague and quite circular.
The Mudigwe Sogomu, Benandi, Jirubander, Kare, Karukusa, Jiruba, Tankure, Tankunang, Sogobushi.
So His Holiness is wondering, because if you look at Jaina taxonomy of reality, they have 9, kind of primary facts, and one of which is the life force. Yes. He's wondering how are they defining that?
So this should be common. It should be common.
Yes.
One reality. Yeah. Not like Atma or not Atma.
Yeah.
I think this is common.
Yes,
so I think
it is.
we can seek some sort of easier sort of
understanding
about these things. Yeah, Buddhist explanation failed. I think we should seek from
Jaina.
Like that.
Okay. So, although there are 8 qualities involved in the most simple kind of awareness, chitta plus the 7, I want to focus on just 4 of them, because it seems to me that these are very relevant to the kind of discussion we had this morning. So I have already said something about chitta. It is just this bare consciousness of an object. It's nothing else. But it needs these other factors in order to fully be conscious. So I want to talk about this one.
진짜 조선을 지금.
조선을 근데 유리보다 남시 유리보다 좀 세죠. 유점 리바. 조 유기 개발을 무슨 중세 뒤에서 지금 작업. 유점 리바.
쉐바타라 기억이 좀 말봐.
쉐바타다 알다 조선 배워.
그래서 세리 좀 라비는 쉐바타라 기억을 봐. 뒷말.
말해. 뒤 간다.
저리서 신도 수준 있으셔.
So I'm going to talk about perception now, one-pointedness, and attention, these ones, their definition. So the first one, perception. So this is how it is... Sanya. So this is how it is defined in the Theravada text. It says it has the characteristic of perceiving. Not very helpful. Though actually, this is I think it is important that it uses an action word, perceiving. It is an event, it is something that happens. So its function is to make a mark on the object that is a condition for perceiving again that something is the same thing. So you make a mark. So this is like a carpenter making a mark on a piece of wood. This seems very clear. And it manifests by producing the idea, the sanya, that corresponds to the mark that has been observed. So
it's quite close to the Sarvastivada.
Good. So this seems to be perception in a particular kind of technical sense. It's very specific. So it's to do with categorizing and putting labels on things. And it seems to me that it is understood as a kind of mental filing system. You put what you have perceived in the right boxes.
또 유기 개발 잡아들게 돼. 그건 생각으로.
The fact that it is to do with making a mark means that it is clearly important for the Theravada understanding of how memory works, since memory is also a matter of recognizing things and recalling things and comparing present experience with past experience. So it's very important for memory, this category of sanya. So
memory. So here, memory, you're talking about sati?
No. Memory. This is a difference, I think, between Theravada and Vaibhashika, Sarvastivada, that they put much more emphasis on sanya as to do with memory. In the Pali tradition, sati, smriti, is exclusively kusala, wholesome. I will talk about this. So,
we're checking because in the Tibetan system we have Abhidhamma kosha and Samuchaya system. So here, the Abhidhamma kosha perspective may be more relevant. Yeah.
So it's also important to understand that from the Theravada perspective, and I think probably from the Sarvastivada perspective as well, sanjñā doesn't necessarily perceive what is there. It can get things wrong. So this is an example given in the text. When young animals look at a scarecrow is clear? They get the idea, they get the perception, person, yes. We hope, or the farmer hopes. And again, 1 year from now, when I try to recall what happened here, I will maybe have a different sanya from other people. So sanya can be quite different. It doesn't correspond to reality, as it were, necessarily.
Because in the bare sense, from the Sarvastivada point of view, samnya means discrimination and recognizing something as it is. So it could be totally mistaken, but you can still think that's it.
Yes, okay. Yeah. I think that's... So the next factor important in attention I want to talk about is this one-pointedness, because there was some...
So this is omnipresent mental factors.
This one, Chitta Kaggata, yes, omnipresent. For Theravada, it is omnipresent.
He's only asking about samnya. Samnya is omnipresent.
Also omnipresent.
So that's the same, yeah.
So this morning there was some discussion of one-pointedness. I think the definition is important. So this chitta kaggata, I think, as was said this morning, is a term for samadhi when it occurs in any kind of consciousness. So the Theravada is saying that there is a small element of a seed of samadhi in every kind of consciousness.
Indeed.
So generally, if you look at many of the qualities that the generally the Buddhist perspective is that if you look at many of the qualities that the meditators are cultivating, whether it is single-pointedness of the mind or vipassana, these are qualities that arise from natural faculties that remain in the form of seed, naturally present in all of us.
So
shamatha, attainment of shamatha is a function of perfecting and developing this single-pointedness.
Okay. I just want to look at the definition because it seems to me quite important. So the definition, its characteristic is not wandering away, not being distracted. Its function is to make the qualities that have arisen congeal, stick together. So this is old-fashioned, it's like water binding together soap powder to make a ball of soap.
So even in the case of, say, a distorted awareness, one would expect some degree of this chitta eka gata.
Yes.
Yeah.
For the Theravada.
For the Theravada.
Yeah. So,
because His Holiness is saying that this is the same perspective from the Abhidhamma Kosha, and for the time being he's saying, leave Abhidhamma Samuchaya aside because my personal preference is for Abhidhamma Samuchaya.
So, for the Theravada, I think it's important to understand that one-pointedness is not trying to make the mind stay with the object. It is actually the mind resting on the object.
Exact.
Yeah. So
it's not a matter of effort.
Yeah. So concentration is easy. Okay. You know that you have concentration when it is easy to stay with the object. There is no tendency to wander. I think this is important for attention. It's also important to note that for the Theravada, you can be very concentrated, but no mindfulness.
So can you explain that?
So, if I watch the television, I am very concentrated on watching the television, but this is not really mindfulness. Or if I have a nice meal, I sit and eat, and I have no attention for anything else, so I'm very focused and concentrated. I don't have to make my mind pay attention to this.
아니 민주가 진짜 잡아야 되겠다.
So His Holiness is
Someone is
wondering, yeah, what about people who seem to be very focused and mindful in what they're doing,
wrongdoing.
and maybe
destructive.
completely destructive in a destructive activity? Would you say there is no mindfulness there?
For the Theravada,
For the
they have to say that it is not real mindfulness.
Yeah,
There
yeah,
is
what about it?
they say strong
Concentration.
attention, but strong concentration, strong sanya, but no real mindfulness.
So on this question one, I'm interpreting. So on the question one, are you virtually equating mindfulness as a mental factor with right mindfulness?
Yes.
Good.
So this is for Theravada. Must be.
또 뭐가 주신다 저거. 왜?
말해.
뭐
뭐
주신
저
셈이
배짱바 유행하러 생각 상하래.
원래.
장말랭으로.
알래.
뭐 저는 장말랭으로. 제바에는 인지미지 개원 빅 잡고 가면
안디셔스 안데 너도 루 말봐요.
말해.
뭐 저는 아니야. 인연랑 그 정루신 너도 루 쓴 거로요.
말해. 자와라요. 너도 별로네. 자외 슈고되어. 로요. 디스를 요인이 돼 말해. His Holiness is wondering whether, in the Abhidhamma Kosha system, if mindfulness, smriti, is listed as a universal, omnipresent,
I think
then
so.
that would imply that it's not virtuous.
Yeah.
So His Holiness is wondering whether that is really the Vaibhashika position or Vasubandhu's own position, where he is presenting Sotrantika.
Okay.
But my suggestion was that he was presenting Vaibhashika faithful, because otherwise he would have something at the end saying that's what they say, or they claim, or they assert. He always kind of indicates that.
So, okay. So now I want to talk about this one attention, manasikara in Pali, manaskara. So manasikara makes the mind unlike the previous mind. It brings the mind into action by leading the mind to the object. It has the characteristic of making the mind move, the function of joining the associated mental qualities together on the object. It manifests a state of facing the object. Because it leads associated mental qualities to the object, it should be seen as the charioteer or guide. So manasikara seems to be something very simple. It simply steers the mind to an object. It doesn't do anything else other than that. And there also seems to be this idea that without manasikara, we would be stuck. The mind wouldn't be able to shift, to move to the next object. Very simple.
So how is the distinction drawn between then the function of cetana, the intention, and manasikara, the attention? Because cetana also has the function of bringing the mind to the object.
But I think cetana is understood as having some purpose, whereas manasikara has no purpose, no will. So, yeah.
And manasikara the sim yolo yo zam chele kada koyo korto jube sim jushin da yoro chinyerbchi ko de kalo junyer chagores. So am I right in understanding that cetana or the intention needs to have some kind of purpose, and towards that purpose the mind is directed, whereas manasikara simply steers all the associated mental factors to the object?
This is
With
what I understand. It's like just looking.
So there is no specific purpose.
No specific purpose.
So what about purpose? So what about very natural cognitive activities that just seem to pop up, where there is no deliberate intention? So in these processes, we would find both Chetana and Manasikara.
Mm-hmm. That is correct, yes. There is a distinction. This is, I feel this is like a Geshe exam, I think. I have a horrible feeling I may fail.
You'll be in good company.
So it's almost saying that there's nothing to do with the Gishi exams. We're all trying to get together and see if we can expand our understanding.
I'm just suddenly worried that I cannot remember the right answer. There is an answer to the question, but I feel like the student who can't remember it.
And back to the question.
Yeah. I was hoping to distract attention.
Yeah. Someone was saying that in the debate context, if the person who is sitting for the exam says that it's proving to be difficult, then you are emboldening the person who's asking the question.
I should not admit it's true. Okay.
Yes.
There is a distinction.
So the reason why is, to give a little background.
Yeah.
Solons was saying that when he has been exposed with the Abhidhamma Samuchaya's listing of the 5 omnipresent factors, putting feeling as the first one. In the list, so is the first one. So he has never really been comfortable that something isn't quite right here. Then later on, because he feels that in terms of the actual development, it is the intention, the chetana, should come first, which then leads to manasikara. The intention, and then to attention, and then so on. But then later he read another text by Asanga, Shravaka Bhumi, which is the levels of Shravaka, where Asanga has a much more detailed explanation, where he talks about the intention being the first one. And then, intention is the one factor that turns the mind to the object, and manasikara, or attention, selects from the field of experience what one wants to attend to, and then comes the perception or discrimination, and then which then leads to the contact, and then contact leads to the feeling. So which His Holiness feels is a kind of phenomenologically a kind of a more easy, more understandable kind of a sequence. So because he's still quite unsettled, so that's why he's asking you these very probing, specific questions. Yeah.
No, it is.
Yes. No. Yes. So he's saying that, so the here in this context of debate, the opponent, your opponent, is someone who's asking these questions out of pure heart, wanting to learn something.
I think the Theravada makes a distinction between Chaitana that is more active, that is really active, and Chaitana that is somehow almost dormant. Yeah. It is still there. So Chaitana is
Sempa.
Is more like the kind of director. I think one one simile, if I remember correctly, for manasikara is it's like a rudder.
I need to interject.
Yeah.
To include all the scientists, we're asking for them to have a very steep learning curve here.
Yeah.
But if you can keep with the English, because you've made one-on-one translations, that's Manasakara and Chet and so forth. If you can use the English, I think it will be helpful for everybody.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So Chetana is volition or intention, as you wish.
Volition or intention can be more active and can be almost dormant. So in the dormant state, it is not really, it's taking a back seat. It only, so it,
sembatele chedu kulon debe sembata ya chedu kuloma debe semba ya balanye sorji ni yimji dangi ores sa sheba mangbolia semba slapti jimje kopige kulon kcho kubuis mare
it is the lalia sembele da sembele ni shegro la kongaso.
So in connection with Chetana, the intention, there's a discussion in the Sarvastivada of karma, which are in the form of Chetana, intention, and then the intended karma. Are these distinctions drawn in the Theravada tradition as well?
So that is sembele sembade kare. And the simju semba the shegro.
Larim.
So da and kundungan nange and semba shadia dida laini shere kedu sembele semba ni de chaba.
So you want to bring this up?
Sure. There's within karma, there's a very important distinction in this tradition anyway, the Indo-Tibetan, between voluntary and involuntary behavior, action. If it's involuntary, then it's a very different type of action than where there's a full intention behind it.
Yes.
So killing a fly accidentally, you just step on it, you never saw it, whereas seeing a fly and then hitting it like that.
Yes.
These are two very different actions.
Yes.
So the question His Holiness just now posed is making this very reasonable.
So dimare di chalo sawada salama jibsha.
My mistake.
Sorry.
Mare.
Sembele.
Lunga lela.
Sembele da.
Oh, 가서 봐. 가서다. 가다 lunga 레진 제용내기. 토메스 굴lunг 내려. 심주
The
삼바티샤.
distinction is drawn between karma in the form of an intention, which leads to the action, and the intended karmic act. So you have an intention to do something, and then this leads to an actual action, which is the outcome. So the actual action is the intended karmic action, and the intention that gives rise to is the karma in the form of an intention. So, so here the same term is used, chetana, or intention. So is that the same as the 5 omnipresent factors, or 7?
lunga le matun 공기.
네.
굴lunग 내가 심주 삼바티샤. 다지네 lunga le matun 사벨레스.
No, it is not.
단도 수진 시고 단데 잠을로 탄유로 인자로 단 도리로 인지도 맨다자 자 드린 비자네 딘자도 심주 삼바티 lunga le 댕해지로 코 드라면 레면도 봐.
Because here, in the context of karma, then it's not a dormant intention, because it is leading to an actual physical and verbal act.
yeah. What I wanted to say, in the simplest kind of awareness, when we simply, as we were talking yesterday, see color or hear sound, before you react, because Chaitana is, or volition, intention is in some sense present. But in that simplest awareness, it is just dormant. It is not really doing anything very much.
또 세벨레 세벨레디 일을 시작하고 그랬다. 일을 시작이 그군을 난 치고 그랬다.
그래. 말씀 주신 것도 샤샤죠 걸다. 이네도 쿠란 도면 세대. 야,
맞아. 심주 세벨도 걸 두서 도면 가서
말 잡아야 말해.
누가 맞으면 알아요.
잡아야 말해. 셰바ben 루마팅 셰바. 근데 갑래야 다 셰바 요벤자 셰바 요zel 심주 세바 샤고 걸어. 근데 심주 다 심주 세바 되게 되고 굴롱 근데 뭐 숙지 뭐 매대니 냐냐르지. 그래서 이나 지단 요랬어.
그렇고.
So let us move on. So what I just wanted to contrast finally, attention, or I have put here also bringing to mind, maybe is perhaps a more vivid way of translating in English. But in contrast to concentration, concentration rests on the object, attention turns to the object.
Concentration,
but in order to have concentration, you need to apply manasikara, attention.
Yes, they must be there, all seven. So, just as I was saying briefly, this kind of simple awareness with just the seven factors only occurs for colors, sounds, smells, tastes, right at the moment of sensory input, at that first moment. After that, there must be more than these seven. It must be more, okay?
말해 그 말해 심주 탐지를 잡거라 심 탐지를 잡거라 되네 심주 둔점 군두점 예배기 셰바디 아니 왕시에 끼지 당부 도매 그 나름마다 요 말에서
도매걸로 마도 요 말이죠.
요 말에서 대주고다 심주 지전 현담 분야 볼래요 그래서
So whenever we begin to pay more attention or begin to engage with something, you have to have more factors. First of all, there are 6 listed. I give the...
맞아 심중 somebody can 거래 삼때는 일을 제왔을 때 다서 쇼처치 되는 레코체 되는 단 두시도 거셔하고 있는 거다 두시리 매매는
So in this case
들어봐서 가르자 무시고 책 쉐르잖아요 심 꾸지 코드로 들었잖아요 심 기지 당각해두는 예였어
저는 뒤를 남구지 입지 단지 욕부시 우지기 돈에
욕부시를 주고 싫어
so
링하고 충대에는
충대 제가
되게 충대는 하시고 뒤송만 하고 걔가 걔가 좀 지자체였어
충대는 걔가 뒤에 비춰봐라 야말다야 걔가 뒤에 충대지 충대나 뭔가 숨어야지 야 충대 잠지
So, given that these are, present in all instances of very simple awareness, is the implication that they are simultaneous?
Yes.
The 7 mental factors are simultaneous.
For the Theravada, they...
So even in the Sarvastivada tradition, it seems it's simultaneous, but His Holiness was thinking that there needs to be some sequence, however brief they may be, because if you look at the 5 omnipresent factors listed, feelings, intention, then brings the manasikara, and there needs to be some sequence here. But His Holiness is saying maybe he is wrong, completely off the off the mark.
According to them also seems now, because my view is wrong.
I'm just reporting what the tradition says. So when we try to pay more attention, more deliberately pay attention, we have factors like thinking of vitakka, examining vichara, commitment, vitarka vichara, commitment adimoksha. Vigor or joy, virya, priti, joy, and finally chanda comes. So I want to focus a little on these 2, vitaka and vichara, because they are very important in, I think, applying the mind, in attention. So, Vitakka, I have translated it as thinking of. I don't know how else to translate. So its characteristic... Its characteristic is to lift the mind onto the object. Its function is persistently to strike the object. It manifests as bringing the mind close to the object. This is the traditional definition. So, in contrast to manasikara, which simply seems to be the mind... So in contrast, manasikara seems to be just moving, turning to the object. Vitakka is pushing the mind onto the object. Yeah,
that
so
makes
more
sense.
Deliberate. Next, vichara.
So would you say that they belong to the kind of category of more of an intelligence type? Like Prajna type?
That is also said, so that when you do a lot of intellectual thinking, you need this kind of vitakka and vichara. But also it is very important in the Theravada account, and probably in the Indo-Tibetan account, it's very important for samatha meditation to use this, to keep the mind on the object in the theory. Okay.
Yes.
So vichara is then, by means of vichara, the mind wanders over an object. So it is exploring the object, constant.
So just an aside, in the presentation of the jhana states, so the four levels of form state and four formless states, would you say the presentations between the Theravada and Sarvastivada are pretty much similar?
Same, yes. Same. Yeah. So vichara is exploring the object, wandering over it. Its characteristic is constant rubbing of the object. So vitakka strikes, vichara rubs.
In the Abhidhamma Kosha, His Holiness was saying, citing the verse which says that vitakka and vichara, these two are like a more rough, kind of coarse approach and a more finer approach.
Okay.
And that's the distinction drawn.
But so my conclusion or interpretation is that vichara seems to be a kind of close attention to the details of the object. So this understanding of vitakka and vichara is brought out, I think, very well by some similes that they use. So when you want to clean a pot, one hand holds it, this is vitakka, the other hand polishes. So this, or like a
Yes. His Holiness is wondering whether vichara is, for vitakka, it's good enough simply to hold the object. Wouldn't there be some form of analysis, application involved?
Well, yes. This is when I was thinking this morning that vitakka and vichara are particularly relevant to what Anne Treisman was talking about this morning, what she called focused attention. attending to the details seems to be something similar to this vichara, exploring. So that, and the other one, distributed attention, in a way is more vitaka. You can immediately get the general picture. But if you need to examine something, put things together, vichara has to be very active, which seemed to, so there seemed to be some parallel here to the understanding. Okay. So, so far I have been talking about very basic, simple kinds of awareness. So, but whenever you are aware of an object, according to Theravada, the mind immediately begins to engage with the object. This is involuntary. It does it, whether you like it or not, most of the time. So the engagement with the object can be virtuous, unvirtuous, akusala, if it is motivated by attachment, aversion, or delusion. Or it is wholesome, if it is motivated by friendliness, non-attachment.
wholesome, unwholesome, yeah, you couldn't go so well.
Yeah.
That he kissed the Udo. Chalama Society. Oh. Saya Marwa.
To some Karuma Kunam, Kessigur.
Oh, they didn't.
So, both the unwholesome and wholesome kind of engagement with an object will involve some vitaka and vichara. But they will also involve very many other factors. So, according to the Theravada, if there is, for example, a wholesome engagement with the object, there will be 21 or 22 simultaneous. This is again in the same moment.
Okay.
Okay. I want to pick out one of those wholesome qualities, and that is this mindfulness. So, as I said earlier, mindfulness for the Theravada is always, if there is mindfulness, then the consciousness, the awareness is wholesome by definition. Right mindfulness. So, what is mindfulness?
So, sorry, how many of the wholesome factors are universal, wholesome?
19.
Gewesama, jugu. So you spoke about 21 or 22, so where does the others come in?
The 7 universals.
Okay.
19 are universal. Then there are other factors that may be, what did I put?
Minimum of 21 or 22.
Okay.
I cannot add up.
Sure.
I think I mean, someone do my arithmetic for me. Do I mean 31 or 32? 7, 5, and 19.
So it would be 30.
31, yeah.
31. Sumchu sochi ne sumsu ni kamuche. Ta gebe sama jurguche. Dinga lo kundu tuyunche. Ani tanda yungay rupchen nga legdwa.
또 되게 그룹의 유닛들이 배제다고 도와. 다한테 계속만 죽고디 남주한테 그래.
저나 주래.
겨우 죽지 간을 때 개박하도. 저 주간 개박하도. 저기.
So this may be going off a little bit of tangent, but
좀 이제 나 그런 좀 요구면서
His Holiness is slightly worried that in getting into this kind of detail Buddhist discourse, some of you might be feeling a little bored.
Scientists are not bored. This analysis is actually very extremely interesting, and some of us are trying to think how it maps onto decomposition into microprocesses that all go together to make up what we would call attention. So attention is this overall set of microprocesses, and you're unpacking all of those in
So then to follow up on the question, because in the Abhidhamma, so in the Abhidhamma Kosha system, there are 10 universal wholesome factors.
Yeah.
These are so you have Shraddha, which is the faith or confidence.
This is the same.
Yeah. Yeah. So these are Shraddha, faith or confidence, heedfulness, which is Aparamada, Shindujang. So then you have Shinjang, which is the, how do you translate it?
Pliancy.
Or pliancy or tranquility.
This is,
Which is, what is the Sanskrit term for that? Prashapta. And then equanimity, upeksha. And then mota, hiri, the sense of shame. Teyu, which is
conscience.
same.
Yeah, and then two roots, which are non-attachment and non-aversion.
Same.
Then non-harming.
Yeah.
And then virya. So these are the 10. So His Holiness is wondering what more is there on the Theravada list.
No, 9. No.
I will.
Just 9, huh?
19.
So I mean 19 means on the top of 10. Which Abhidhamma Kosha mentioned.
I have
Actually, I will say more a bit later, the full list.
Right, good.
I wanted to say something about mindfulness because this word is used so much. And the more I think about it, I'm not sure that I really know what it means.
You mean the English term?
The English term, and even, if I am honest, I'm not sure that I fully understand the Theravada Buddhist understanding. So, but I will want to give some features that are brought out. So the first thing is simple. It is remembering in the sense of not forgetting or not losing the object. Then it is also said to be, so this seems to be a kind of, I think what the neuroscientists refer to, or psychologists, as a kind of short-term memory. They use this.
Or working memory.
Working memory is one, yeah. Short-term. The other characteristic that is brought out, it is not bobbing about, not floating on the surface of the object. It is not like, when there is no mindfulness, the mind floats on the surface like a ball bobbing about on the surface of the water, it says. So mindfulness enters into or plunges into the object. So it's like a post firmly established in the object. The other very important feature of mindfulness is guarding. It's a doorkeeper, gatekeeper. So it stands guards at a gate of the senses, and it makes sure that, in the Theravada case here, unwholesome qualities do not enter. It stops them. They can't come in unnoticed.
말다. 바요되는 창고래. 개주 순버때 가정은 집에는 바요 개주로. 왕배운 권돔니인데 바요로 와. 레니게 임제 신제 왕배운 권돔니 아니 룡하게 잡아대.
바요 심을 들어오면
라.
그도 전실리로.
맨 바요.
왕배 고돔으로 전실리로.
전시로 와.
전실 영어는 바요고.
네. 간다 바요기 지레로 버디. 고송님들 봐. 고송한테 바요 차들.
네.
전바당 시신 때 공시송님들 바요 차거로.
왜?
Rupert, can I ask for a quick clarification? Does sati mindfulness keep unwholesome qualities from entering or from entering unnoticed?
I think the idea, because it's unwholesome, is that if you see that they're trying to enter, the doorkeeper would say, you can't come in. You're not allowed.
바요 주니 수업이한테 해서지.
Yes.
랑도긴 간다 전시 때 그도 용가 있는 사람.
Yes.
그 바요에는 전시되는지.
바요 개원하셔.
어느 봐도 내봐.
Yes. 생존하시는 바요 개원하셔.
네. 어때요? 미시.
So Solon is wondering this. From the Sarvastivada tradition, we have a separate mental factor called abramada, heedfulness, and what the specific role of this heedfulness is it heedfulness that is guarding the door of the senses, or is it mindfulness that is guarding the door of the senses? So we were wondering within the Sarvastivada tradition the distinction between the two.
Right. I think obviously the Theravada takes some of the qualities of apramada and sees it as somehow a unified thing. That seems to be the case.
아니다. 대단하다. 봐도 내가 내스. 샤리나? 그다 나 결혼인 삼배. 그다음에 결혼인 삼배 되게 참바지가 소리 거다. 딱 밀는 수저로 나 결혼인 삼배 되게 아래 어느 데 전시 되게 바위를 그래.
그래. 전시가 바위 된 거래.
그래?
만게 돼서 배제 키우.
나 오도 다이다. 리벌 레밤 능류 당사.
I brought the text. No, I was just trying to figure out what is the sequence between application of mindfulness and abramada in the Sarvastivada tradition, whether it is abramada, the heedfulness that is leading to mindfulness, or whether it's the mindfulness that is leading to heedfulness.
별로 차이는다. 별로 차이는데 고법별 거두다, 클라스별 거두다, 니녀별 거두다, 직계시별 거두 있네. 그도 전시 수수 된 거.
나래.
나 가서 그래. 배너 클라스별 거두. 짜자미 저것도 후금이 저것도 부금이 저것도 센다. 뒤 전시 수수 된 거.
나래.
그봐. 뒤 심을 놓고 나 결혼이 있어서 바위도야는 뒤를 거.
나래.
아 가시네 지삼 전에는 뒤는 거야.
나래.
저는 전시를 내야 그래 바위가 내고. 나는 바위 계셨으면 좀 바위 찌르 켜들어서
시차.
그래서 통도.
시차 제소리잖아. So in the case of a monastic,
그 바위에서도 저지라고 지랑도 계시 매체. 그걸 그도 있는 직도 하지. 가서 뒤가서 인진 시시로다.
vigilance 소리잖아.
맞아. 지
careful 소리잖아.
또 있어야 돼.
Very cautious.
cautious.
So in the context of monastic practice, monks are supposed to act in a particular way, and when they're eating, not to make so much noise and slurping and all of this. So in the actual moment-to-moment activity, there seems to be a demand for a certain level of awareness and mindfulness of what you're doing. But it's also saying, in order for that kind of very sharp kind of alert mindfulness to be and awareness to be there needs to be a basic level of heedfulness, which takes into account the sense that he or she is a monastic member and I'm not supposed to do this. So His Holiness feels that heedfulness, abhidhamma, is not really specific to any particular context. It's more of a diffused sense of, overall sense of cautiousness, which gives you this sense of cautiousness.
Or conscientiousness, I think, really is close to it.
야, 봐요. 지사샤적으로 보다. 대사만한 봐요. 이슬람이냐? 뭐 봐야지. 지사적으로냐? 그래, 그거 뭐는 협점 용사래. 그럼 저렇게 좀 말해. 저래가 누구래? 아,
땡문도랑
그러시면 그거 뭐는 협점 용. 지지구지구세. 그 차도는 뭐 됐어.
나를 뜻인지.
아, 저 이거는 저 도주지. 지도야 그것도 되시죠.
There's a kind of a slightly pejorative expression, which sort of reflects the attitude of overall Tibetan Buddhist scholars towards Abhidhamma.
It's the same all over the world.
And it says that this is a system where it says you need this and you need that, but if you push, there doesn't seem to be real entailment.
I'm going to jump a little bit to my one conclusion, that it seems to me that mindfulness in Theravada is understood as a kind of presence of mind, that when there is mindfulness, you know how to act appropriately. So it's a kind of presence of mind, seems to actually be a better translation. So I'm going to jump this, because actually I think clear comprehension is not so relevant, though Theravada understanding. So I want to give very quickly the full list of the 19 wholesome qualities. So faith, mindfulness, self-respect, conscience, non-attachment, goodwill, balance, this is upeksha. And then this is the interesting part, which I want to just say a little bit about. So this is an expansion, I think, of prashabdi, of tranquility. So it says in every wholesome state of mind, there is mindfulness, and then there are these 6 pairs, tranquility of body and tranquility of mind, lightness of... Lightness of body.
So these qualities are actually described in the attainment of shamatha.
Yeah.
So these qualities are
So
described.
it's interesting that here it is said they are in...
And also as a result of practicing, cultivating virya.
Yeah.
So it says that there is a kind of a lightness of both body and mind where you can easily apply.
So lightness, softness, readiness, kamanyata, adaptability, pagunyata, straightness, ujukata, rijukata. Okay.
Very good.
So this is, what it seems to be saying is that when there is mindfulness and it feels good. This is, you feel, so, mindfulness and awareness feels good and right in mind and body. So.
No.
So on the 7th of August in 1974, this Frenchman, Philippe Petit, he walked on a wire strung between the Twin Towers in New York City at a height of 1,368 feet above the ground, no net. And he was on this wire for about 40 minutes.
40.
40. Yeah. So, what it seems to me, I want to suggest, having thought about this, the science, I think David yesterday applied a scientific model to Buddhist meditation. Here I think we can apply a Buddhist model to some ordinary activity. Well, not quite ordinary. But
Non-Buddhist.
a non-Buddhist. So, now you can see a broader view. What it seems to me is that to do this, this man must have developed perfect mindfulness and concentration and in balance. If he becomes, and it also illustrates something about concentration and mindfulness, if he becomes too concentrated, so if he loses concentration and starts thinking, oh, I'm on a wire 1,000 feet in the air, if I make a mistake now, I will fall and die, he will become frightened and he will wobble and he will finish. If he becomes too concentrated on what his feet are doing and too focused, then if the wind changes and the wire moves, he will not be able to balance. But the most interesting thing, so he needs this presence of mind to do this. One of the interesting things I find about this, and when he talked about it afterwards, he said when he was here, he was not frightened at all. He's smiling. It's a man, yeah, sorry.
70s.
French.
French
Welsh. Is this okay still?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay.
Sorry.
Do a smile.
As a presenter, I would like to interject, not as an interpreter. When he's doing this, are you suggesting that he's actually, this action is itself a virtuous action that's going to lead, from the Buddhist perspective, to a fortunate rebirth? Because you say it's mindfulness.
Yes, I am.
So what is virtuous about that? If he does it 10 times, he goes to higher realms of rebirth?
I think he. That is the. That is the implication of what I'm saying, and
Okay.
I am happy personally with that implication. I think this is a kind of mindfulness of body, a kind of samadhi, almost.
No question, mindfulness. Wholesome
His Holiness, that it's very mindful is for sure. Whether it's wholesome in the Buddhist sense, His Holiness feels would depend on the motivation.
Okay, I'm not saying, I don't want to say, my understanding would be from the Theravada analysis, in that moment, there must be some wholesomeness. After he is finished, I don't know. But the motivation is interesting because he did say he wanted to do this because for other people, that it was something beautiful to do, for no other reason than that. He said that.
Then it's also.
Okay. Well, I wanted to say something about this because it relates to what I think Anne talked about this morning. According to the Theravada understanding of being aware of an object, there are different courses. So you can be aware of an object and fully engage with it, or sometimes you don't fully engage. So this is the first course. When an object comes into view or is present, you turn to the sense door. This is the initial turning. Then you see or hear or smell or taste. This is very simple awareness of the sense object. You then begin to process the data. According to the tradition, this needs a little vitaka and vichara, but only vitaka, vichara. It is not wholesome or unwholesome, this part. You then engage with the object. And this area, when you engage with the object, it will either be kusala or akusala. It must be one of the two.
Gimme.
Finally, you register the object in some way. You note the object. And they give a simile, which I think makes it clear. So a man sleeps beneath a mango tree. The wind disturbs the branches. A mango falls, and he is disturbed. So this is just turning to the sense door. The man opens his eyes and sees the mango. So this is the basic seeing, the basic sense data. He then picks up the mango, presses it, smells it, and decides that it's tasty, ready to eat. So this is just beginning to process the data. Still quite simple awareness. He then eats. This is wholesome or unwholesome engagement with the object. And then he, tasty. That was a good mango. This is registering the object.
But every mental state has to be either wholesome or unwholesome. There's no ethically neutral.
At this stage.
Oh, but there is on other occasions.
No. Everything up to here is not
Ethically neutral then.
Is ethically neutral. Everything up to the point of gauging with the object. And even after... So only the eating of the mango, that is where you do something wholesome or unwholesome.
So if you're eating a mango, it has to be either wholesome or unwholesome. It cannot be ethically neutral.
No. Well, not eating a mango. Eating a mango is...
The mental state. The mental state while eating a mango has to be...
No. We're not eating a mango. Eating a mango is just a metaphor for that stage.
You're pushing the metaphor.
No.
For example, Rupert, for example, if someone, out of a pure motivation, decides to do a charitable act, and then the moment that intention has been set, it is said that even when the person is walking towards... so this is an altruistic motivation. Even when he's walking towards the person, other person to give...
or the place.
Right from there, the koshala process has begun, wholesome process has begun. So the kind of... so he hasn't met the object, come into contact with the person, and the act has not been actually done, but koshala or wholesome processes are already begun.
Yes. Yes. But this is a metaphor, a simile for something that happens very fast. This is not a simile for a full course of action. I must finish, but I just want to say something because it's relevant to, I think, to what Anne was saying this morning. So the first one is called very great. So you go through all the stages. There is then one which lacks the last stage. You engage with the object, but it's not registered. There is then a stage, it's slight. You turn to the door, you see, you process the data, but then you don't pay attention. So it's as if you half attend to it. You don't fully. You know something has happened. You have actually registered it, not in the full sense, but it's come in, but you don't do anything with it. And then finally, there is one there, the sense is just disturbed, but you don't go. And it seems to me that this slight and very slight may be relevant to what Anne was talking about this morning, when things slip into the mind, as it were, unnoticed, and don't get to the top level. But I have gone so long, so I must stop. So I cannot tell you about maps, but I will read. Shall I read out my questions?
I mean, you can finalize, or if you want to go on to the conclusions.
I will just read my conclusions. Okay. So there's a conclusion and question. So for Theravada Buddhism, the wholesome mind is a kind of rich and full awareness that feels good. Mindfulness is a very important aspect of this awareness, but needs to be understood in relation to other mental factors that all contribute to this kind of awareness. Now, this is a question we've partly already raised. So if tightrope walking develops mindfulness and concentration, is there any difference between it and traditional forms of Buddhist meditation? Could it be a form of Buddhist meditation? Some people in the room might get worried in case they get given this as the...
In fact, there is a beautiful, similar analogy in Shantideva's text. Yeah, it's actually taken from a sutra where describing the quality of the alertness or mindfulness and awareness. And there was the analogy is a prisoner who has been made to carry a pot full of sesame oil on his head and has to walk towards a particular destination, and next to him is a guy who's holding a sword, ready to strike, chop his head off if he spills even a drop.
Yes, yeah.
So,
very close, that's right. Then I had a general philosophical question. So, are Buddhists and scientists both producing what are maps or models of the mind? Is there a danger that we take our maps too seriously, that we forget that they are just maps and mistake them for reality?
Correct.
Do you understand? I hope this perhaps illustrates the point I'm trying to make. This is from a story written by the man who wrote Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll. So this is a quotation. What a useful thing a pocket map is, I remarked. That's another thing we've learned from your nation, said mein Herr. Map making. But we've carried it much further than you. What do you consider the largest map that would be really useful? About 6 inches to the mile. Only 6 inches? Exclaimed mein Herr. We very soon got to 6 yards to the mile. Then we tried 100 yards to the mile. And then came the grandest idea of all. We actually made a map of the country on the scale of a mile to the mile. Have you used it much? I inquired. It has never been spread out yet, said mein Herr. The farmers objected. They said it would cover the whole country and shut out the sunlight. So we now use the country itself as its own map. And I assure you, it does nearly as well.
Sabrata. Lumbe sabrata lumbani trubena, and sabra lumba kapyagena. Pam nugris long.
Okay. So there I will.
Wonderful.
Oh.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rupert. This was very engaging.
Thank you.
And I think even quite enlightening to a certain extent, that we know that even within the Buddhist context, there's not a clear understanding what it actually means, mindfulness. But we should just be very careful, I take at least that, from using terms when we're not quite clear what they mean. And we have had a wonderful presentation of really paving the map without putting it over everything. So, shall we just come to your question that you had at the end? Because I think that's quite relevant to further discussion. Do you might want to paraphrase?
The one about tightrope walking.
Yeah. Or no, actually the last one, the philosophical question about Buddhists and scientists.
Well, I think my point was that when we are comparing science, the scientific understanding of the world and of the mind, the way the mind works, and the Buddhist understanding of the way the mind works, I'm wondering sometimes exactly what the intention is, the end product is. Obviously, we sharpen our understanding. Do you need to translate?
No, it's fine.
But are we trying to produce a super map? So we combine the Buddhist understanding with the scientific understanding, and we get more and more detail. And is there some danger that if we put more and more on the map, that the map stops to being useful? Because actually, sometimes a simple map is more useful, more practical than a map that has everything on it. So when you make a map, you must decide what is necessary and essential, not necessarily just put everything on. So this is an open kind of general question.
Nothing to say? I'd like to raise a point with Anne and with you, because you made a very brief comment, Anne, for which you didn't have time to elaborate yesterday, and that is the difference between first person and third person is actually, you felt, primarily an issue of how you're using it. I think you were here, yes? But what I understood you to say is that the primary difference is in the way you're using the data. Oh, thank you. Thank you. With that in mind, and you've just said, the practical use, I would like to put a question to both of you. My understanding of the Buddhist ideal is that for all of the details that we get into in Abhidhamma and so forth, finally we should find some practical application for alleviating suffering, finding happiness, purifying the mind of mental afflictions. That if it has no relevance, I think it's really quite distant from the fundamental motivation of Buddhism. And so when we ask in the Buddhist context, is it practical? We're saying we have all of this model, these maps of all these mental functions, and what are we going to use them for in your meditation, in the purification, in your actual practice of heedfulness, mindfulness, introspection? That's the practicality of it. So the map is really an instrument to direct you to deeper experience that liberates. So if this is true, then I'm wondering, what finally is the motivation, the purpose of these maps? Is it simply in order to create a really good map? Or is it now that you've created the map, you've published your paper, now what?
Yeah, I suppose for scientists it is primarily curiosity.
It's not on.
Okay. Primarily curiosity, but we also hope very much, and it's very often confirmed, that this can be useful, for example, the neuroscience to medical applications. And it turns out in many cases that there are useful applications, developing computer programs to simulate human behavior and so on. But we don't necessarily in advance have these purposes in mind. We really, I think, speaking for myself anyway, want to understand, but the other scientists may well have other answers.
David, you wanted to make a short...
My comment is not about that issue.
Okay.
Is this on? Yeah. I will comment about that issue briefly. It seems to me that there is a synergy between concern over being practical, useful, beneficial, wholesome, and so forth, and concern over satisfying curiosity.
you can't have the one without the other and be fully successful. You need to be motivated in all different directions, and depending where you are in a particular cycle, you may be motivated mostly by curiosity, puzzle solving, so to speak, which has its own virtues, makes you feel healthy, puts you in a wholesome frame of mind, expands your consciousness like Anne was talking about, being happy. And then as a result of the products from that, you go into practical application mode and you figure out how these can be used for engineering purposes to improve the ultimate circumstances in other ways, taking the tools that you have in effect invented and then applying them to improve the situation.
Adele, please.
Yeah, I wanted to come back to Rupert's question because I love the question and it didn't get addressed at all. I think there's a terrible danger of taking our maps as reality. Any of our maps are only similes or approximations, and they're never perfect. And I think there's a real danger in thinking that they're reality, because they're only are trying to understand reality, are only approximating reality, are only imperfect attempt at trying to get the whole understanding, which eludes us. We only get partly there. And so there's always some truth in the map, and there's always some error or something missing. And I think that if we start to take that as the truth, we run into dangers. And I think that's a wonderful question, and I'd love to have a little more discussion of it.
Amishi?
I wanted to ask Your Holiness the same question. Well, we've mentioned as scientists some of our views of the utility for us in having this conversation. Can you say a little bit more about how you think it would be useful from your point of view?
Anna, 그래 또 뒤에 말해. 리변 내가 개발 마셔는 퍼즐 같이 쓰시오. 다. 서 리변 내가 뒤에 참으로 자 겨스게 자 아이나. 네. 겨 개미게 주더니 강사 소수 근우도 대샤마도 그 살지 지고 자는 셔려 가오래. 저도 안데 낭배 중에 송실도 제디 미 터두 단 미육과 sombo부란 게 공부해야 되디 미다 터두 차와 차와인도 돼야 된다. 수비보다 저다. 대주 소년에 그들이야. 지단ben 시제 남샤지 같다는 거죠. 패지 어르선들.
So from the Buddhist point of view, although it is true that from the point of view of the many of the authors who composed this text on mental taxonomy and so on, their ultimate aim is to really help others to lead to liberation and attainment and so on. But however, in the course of their inquiry, there are also situations in context where it is simply the curiosity and inquiry into the understanding reality that drives, part of the inquiry. For example, in one of Maitreya's texts, Ornament of Mahayana Scriptures, he says that without mastery of all 5 fields of knowledge, one can never be, fully knowledgeable. So if you look at the 5 fields of knowledge, many of them are conventional fields of knowledge, need not necessarily be virtues. For example, you have Sanskrit linguistics in it. There is epistemology in the list, and then there is. So there are, in fact, even within the Buddhist tradition, some people hold the opinion that the study of epistemology is necessary only to refute other people's view. It's not necessary if your concern is only attainment of liberation. So what this suggests is... So from that point of view, epistemology is not really part of a kind of a dharmic process. So, and when we talk about ethically virtuous or non-virtuous. However, I mean, so having said that, if you look at many of the philosophical inquiries that are part of the Buddhist discourse, in order to really get very deeply into this, you do need to have some mastery of epistemology and how to understand, how language operates and cognitions, proceed and reasoning proceeds and so on. So without these
all these sort of great master, they are monk. I think really great master or practitioner, right? But at the same time, all their texts or writing full of logic. The way of presentation of Buddhism, not through quotation, but through logic or reason. So that reasons don't love you, logic don't chamas love you.
So by itself, logic or reasoning is neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. So similarly, the pursuit of Sanskrit linguistics, by itself, we cannot say it's a virtuous pursuit or non-virtuous pursuit.
The science
Similarly, science is a human activity. If it is motivated by a wholesome mental states, then it will be a virtuous pursuit. And if it is motivated by a very neutral state of mind, it will be a neutral activity. And if it is motivated by unwholesome mental states, it will be a negative and non-virtuous activity.
The map 다 나저 ben zamling ben map ching에 되게 다 네디나 zamling 샤다 되나 그 요즘 수식식만 네 맵 샤다 저거는 나저 강바디 저거식으로 얘는 강바디는 미커서 여기 미 구조 가르치고 가르쳐 줘요. 내가 그러나 봐.
So with regard to the question of map, in the very act of writing a map, His Holiness was saying that there is already an acknowledgement that this is a facsimile, that it's not reality, because the idea of, in order, if we're going to create a complete map, then we have to draw everything in it, including this house. But then it's an impossible thing to do.
How many people, and then map to each person sometimes remain like this, sometimes remain like that. How?
You cannot represent that in the map. Yeah.
So today is the nang samlun map design. Robs sharing we are mother. So
similarly, when we are talking about developing maps of the mind, it is really a question of approximation. I mean, no one can insist the comprehensiveness of a particular map of the mind.
Sometimes. 미국 저 탐지했으니 스거는데 안 답변은 간수 미국 자 준습니다. 전부 제 미국 주는 변은 간수 다 쇼게 된 미국에 다 되는 미국에 마음버리 미국에 여러셔로 되면
So it's really when developing a map of the mind, much of the perspective is really from a very generic point of view, kind of certain patterns and certain kind of modalities, and even in Buddhist practice we often speak about the object of the meditation as being the entire, world, or all sentient beings, or just all phenomena. But that does not imply that person has been able to view at each and every, piece that constitutes this totality.
I think one thing I remember. I think important is the one Chilean physicist, I think teacher of late Varela.
So this Chilean scientist, who's the late teacher of Varela, the teacher of late Varela, once said that, as scientists, one should not feel attached to their field of inquiry, which His Holiness was saying is very important.
A physicist, but too much attachment towards his own field is wrong. So we, Buddhists, but too much attachment to Buddhism is wrong. Then your mind will become biased. So particularly scientists or Buddhists who who are trying to investigate
using vitaka and vichara, the initial application and find.
Most important thing is your mind should be open.
Yeah.
When we carry investigation, no question of wholesome or unwholesome. If you should do, because
so in the actual act of inquiry, it needs to be completely objective, even not making judgments about whether one is being swayed by wholesome or unwholesome states of mind.
So mind,
so even in the Buddhist context, when one is establishing the understanding of nature of reality, the ethical evaluation, consideration or evaluation is not brought upon there. So, and this model can be appreciated from looking at the way in which the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths. When he first presented the Four Noble Truths, So when Buddha presented the teachings on the Four Noble Truths, he did not begin with what to do. He presented with the understanding of the Four Truths, saying this is the truth of suffering, this is the truth of origin of suffering, and so on. Then later said what needs to be done. The suffering must be recognized, origin must be identified, and so on, or abandoned. So in the Indo-Tibetan understanding, we speak of. If you look at the Buddha's discourse on the Four Noble Truths, what is called the 3 rounds of repetition, and with 12 different characteristics. So this must be similar in the Theravada.
Yes, it's the
same. So first talking about the actual characteristic of the truths. Then talking about the functions of the knowledge.
Yes.
Which is when the ethical evaluation is brought in. And then last, talking about the functions, the results of that ethical engagement.
So you say mapping, or through investigation. When we find some extent, then our generation, I think, fulfill our responsibility. Then further investigation will carry our next generation. Then investigation always go further and further. Till I think human brain becomes smaller. Then no hope. Because of go,
so on the other hand, if your head is becoming more and more bald, then your intelligence, more and more wisdom is coming.
Doubtful. Sorry. So our progress, I think will continue. Like in the field of the particle, matter. Similarly, inner science also will go further. So,
so it's unrealistic to expect someone to come up with a position that this is the final map. There's nothing beyond that. So even in the writings of great masters like Nagarjuna, he never makes the statement that there is nothing left. This is all. I mean, the Buddha himself has said, continue with your inquiry and investigation.
So
His Holiness is not worried about confusing the map with the reality too much.
Attachment, So you thought attachment.
But however, the danger will come from too much attachment to one's own field of inquiry. And here, if one does fall into that trap, then we will do something what Tsongkhapa has said in Lamrim Chimo, the great exposition of the stages of the path to enlightenment, where he says that some people will pick up one piece of, one grain of barley and say that, and this is the essence of all the barleys in the world. So there is that danger because you feel so attached to your own particular area of research that you feel that this represents the knowledge of the entirety.
So from the Buddhist viewpoint, of course, till our mind become Buddha mind, ignorance always there. So knowledge, limitation always there. So nobody can say, oh, my knowledge is complete. Nobody can. Right. Like that.
It's not simply not complete, but also not fully accurate. That yes.
세상 accurate 쳐갖고 unbiased 거래서야지 accurate 나한다.
So that's why we need, unbiased perspective.
Open mind, unbiased.
Unbiased perspective is a goal, but I don't know if it's ever a reality to get completely unbiased.
그래, 다치도 배도 초트 먹는 거 가보면로서 답이 미유럽시 않아마도 제가 다 가나 때 숙연지 가서 간 테디로.
A person, for example, I'm Buddhist, but when I carry some investigation in certain thing, then I must forget I'm Buddhist. So then open. Anything can possible. Even you see some contradictory things may find. So as a result, so
then as a result of this, for example, when His Holiness is confronted with the fact that modern cosmology undermines the traditional Buddhist idea of Mount Meru-centered universe, he doesn't feel uncomfortable or undermined by this.
Absolutely, but what I'm saying is, no matter how much I try to not have a New York Jewish perspective, I grew up in New York and I'm a Jew, and I can't completely escape biases that come from that, no matter how much I try to be open. So you try to be open, but unconscious effects of your experience and your culture and what you've learned come in. So I think we all appreciate that our perceptions are not completely veridical or accurate. And I think it's the same thing with our maps or our theories or our conceptions. We try to be as good and accurate as we can and as unbiased, but we are never completely unbiased.
Your Holiness, I have to follow up just a quick question related to that. If you forget the Buddhist part of your intention, is that something you can really forget?
No. So what His Holiness means is that, for example, when he's engaged in the inquiry of a particular topic, what he means is that he needs to suspend the awareness that he is a Buddhist, and whatever he finds must somehow accord with the Buddhist position and explanation.
Now, for example, I'm Buddhist, because admirer of these sort of great masters. So therefore, I respect Nagarjuna as much as towards the Arya Sangha, Vasubandha. But then when investigation carry, there are many points dismissed about Arya Sangha or Vasubandha's viewpoint. So if you use your devotion, your respect, too strong, then how can dismiss this in their word?
Right.
So it should not come in the way of being able to disagree and refute them.
공식 거봐 뭐는 이제 다들 respect 시거로 다 respect 제니 다 가고 되고도잖아 얘네 공식 거봐 뭐는 이제 다 뭐는 이제 이들 캬나 말아 캬나 들어 말고 뭐는 이제 여자 얘네 다들 좀 되는 먹고 싶어가 들어 말아 당 들어 말아 얘네 공식 거봐
So because of this need to, ensuring that your reverence to, say, for example, the Buddha, does not come in the way of your ability to, critically evaluate his statements. In the Buddhist tradition, they evolved very, complicated hermeneutic approaches, where you make distinctions between what is his intended point and what is explicitly stated, and then the contradictions that one can reveal if you take the statement at face value. So these kind of strategies are developed where, while maintaining the reverence towards the Buddha, you have the ability to disagree what is being stated in a particular scripture.
Right. The only reason I'm mentioning it, this is the last sentence I'll say, is that sometimes our science, as scientists, our science, which we can bring with a good intention to what we decide to investigate, can sometimes be used in ways that may not be good. So in some sense, even though we're trying to be as objective as possible, we have to hold in our mind both our own intention and the potential of other intentions using the science that we're producing. That's where I'm asking about the holding the intention.
medical field is some experiment on animal. 다양한 데 양양 삼당 거죠. 다양한 거 가서 우리 커도 되게 가발에 가지 차이요. 가지를 가발 차이요. 다들 되게 안 그러죠.
So of course you might be pointing towards certain forms of inquiry, research, course of research, and the questions about ethicality of that particular line of pursuit. In these situations, then the question is very complex, where you have to really weigh the overall benefit of this versus the implications of dangers and so on. So you really have to weigh the pros and cons.
So finally, Mathieu.
So, as a French person, I think I have to come back to the tightrope. The example of the tightrope was ambiguous. Ms. Ernest asked about the motivation. He had a smile. It could be, as he said, for offering of beauty, to rejoice people. It could be for fame. But snipers have a very perfect mindfulness. And they also report some kind of enjoyment of hitting their targets. So do hunters. There's a Tibetan verse that without compassion you can kill with a smile. So the mindfulness itself, I think, without, as Jonas mentioned, without the motivation behind, it's just a tool. As Jonas said, it's true for grammar, it's true for science, and the state of flow in which maybe mindfulness might bring is similarly neutral, ethically. Surgeons get in the flow for hours, they can carry on an operation, and artists get into the flow, a mountain climber get into the flow, a meditator also can get into the flow. I mean, perfect mindfulness, sustained over time, and so forth. So the very fact of being mindful is just a very well fine-tuned tool that can be then readily used for wholesome purpose. The example of the sniper, they get in the flow, they enjoy it. And so you cannot say, of course, it's contributing to wholesomeness. So the examples that image can be given is like a hammer, it can be used for building or for destroying, like fuel that can be used for driving in a car or setting ablaze a home. So the motivation has to be the final factor to determine whether that mindfulness is wholesome or not.
Would you want to?
Should I say something?
Respond to that? Yeah, sure.
I'm going to, for the sake of debate, argue the contrary position. If I use...
So first, okay.
So, as I see it, the Theravada tradition is trying to point towards a particular state of mind where there's a kind of harmony of body and mind. It feels right. Mindfulness is connected with lots of other factors, as I've said. So I think it's very clear for me, if we're just using a tool, say, a workman or something like that, I have no problem myself, I think, saying that is wholesome, without particular reference to the motivation beyond the state of mind. When the workman or musician is absorbed in their task and so forth, I think can be understood as a kind of wholesome mindfulness. There may not be, in the Theravada understanding, there doesn't have to be wisdom or understanding there. That can be absent, but the other factors are there. So there is non-attachment and there is goodwill. I think we've all had the experience when we try to use a tool and we get angry. Then we can't do it very well. And I think that's very important. Now, to go back to the example of the sniper, is it unwholesome simply to handle a gun? If I take a gun and use it well, I go with target practice and shoot at a target. Yeah, let me finish. Yeah. I think in the act of firing a gun at a target, there can be a kind of mindfulness and wholesomeness there. I don't see that there is a contradiction. Now, we come to the question of actually pointing a gun and pulling the trigger when it's pointing at a person with the intention to kill someone. I think at this point, if I wanted to answer from the point of view of the Theravada tradition, there must be some, of course, it is unwholesome at that point when you pull the trigger to kill someone. But I'm not sure that you can say that everything leading up to that act, in terms of the mental states, would have to be classified as intrinsically unwholesome. I think what the Abhidhamma is saying is that the mind can switch very, very fast from wholesome states to unwholesome states. I think there's a kind of model of the mind that works. So that is the model of the mind that they're trying to put forward.
But you could have an act that you have decided to do, and once the decision has been made, which is the motivation, and then the act may not be done, say, for a week. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, the initial motivation was set a week earlier. Mm.
But from...
So, I mean, for example, in the Sarvastivada Abhidhamma tradition, the distinction is made between... yeah, this is also common to all other Buddhist traditions, between various types of karma. Karma that was done but not acquired, karma that is acquired but not done, and karma that is both done and committed and acquired, and karma that is neither committed or acquired. So you can have an intention, but not the action. You can have an action without the intention.
I guess the issue would be where the...
So could they in English of the Union?
So I mean the karmic act that was done but not acquired is accidentally stepping on an insect. Mm-hmm. So, but while you are doing it, there must be some mental processes going on.
Yes.
There must be, intention and.
But the
But there is no intention to kill.
No.
That has been said earlier and then continued. maintained. So therefore it's listed as kamigat that is done but not acquired.
Yes, I think that would be the same in the Theravada. If there's no intention
to do it
behind the act, so if it's accidental. But obviously, if while you accidentally step on the ant, you are in an angry state and not paying attention, then there's a different kind of karma.
Really?
So maybe you want to bring that to the field of research and psychology?
Actually, in the limited time available, I'd prefer to follow up a little bit on what Rupert was trying to say there toward the end and put in a plug both for mindfulness and for maps on the positive pro side as opposed to the con side. With respect to mindfulness, it seems to me that under conditions like Rupert was illustrating, the presence of the mindfulness and the so-called flow is actually a positive precursor for becoming enlightened in the sense of experiencing oneness with the overall universe. And I would suspect while Philippe, was walking across that wire, he had increased his probability of becoming enlightened because he had to be in a state while going over that rope where in effect he was unified and coming close to so-called cosmic consciousness. Otherwise, there would be no way whereby he could cope with all of the circumstances and survive the travel across the wire. That's my plug for the mindfulness, in all due respect to Matthew. I think there are certain circumstances where it's more than just a tool. It has positive potential laden in it, and in fact, probably you would not be able to become enlightened without the mindfulness. And because mindfulness has latent in it the seed for enlightenment, it in and of itself is a positive. Now for the maps. If you don't take your maps very seriously,
David, let him respond.
Just briefly, yes. If he has a refined tool, he can progress much better towards enlightenment if he uses that tool with a wholesome intention. No question that to have an absolutely perfect tool is a big step forward, but that doesn't in no way exclude the need for that orienting that tool. And so the sniper, as long as he trained without any slightest intention to kill, that's just developing mindfulness. But the moment the motivation comes, it completely colors the whole thing. We say a crystal takes the colors on the cloth on which it rests. So the whole thing becomes green. That means the whole thing becomes unwholesome. The whole perfect tool of mindfulness becomes completely unwholesome the moment it is applied for a destructive purpose.
Rupert had something to say?
I just want to say very briefly, the Theravada say that mindfulness is a wholesome factor, that it's not neutral. So it's a different classification. So in some level they may be talking about something slightly different from what you're talking about. Well, that was in a way my point.
I read that it also, mindfulness implied the faculty to, in depth, have an insight on what will cause suffering or happiness. Does it contain the understanding of the consequences of what you are, the situation in which you are?
In the third element of the definition he gave there, thank you. If you look at the first two, they're virtually identical to the definitions of mindfulness in the Indo-Tibetan tradition. There was no reference to any wholesome or unwholesome. But then he brought in the third paragraph.
Guarding.
And that is the element of guarding and orienting towards virtue, orienting away from non-virtue. So from the Indo-Tibetan perspective, you could say you're taking elements of heedfulness, incorporating that into the definition of mindfulness. Now mindfulness becomes equivalent to right mindfulness, which means, of course, by definition, it's always wholesome.
Yeah.
But this leaves out times when we have the first two of your definitions, which are simply the non-forgetfulness, the non-floating, the retention, the recollection. It's leaving that out when that is applied, as you're saying, but there is no heedfulness. In which case, then you parse that out and put it into sanya and so forth.
Yeah. Yes, and it's a slightly different model.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And neither model is absolute.
No, so Theravada is trying to bring out something about mindfulness that gets lost.
지난해 누구도 봐요 넘be 잡셔요. 다나래. 봐요 넘be 잡는 봐요 겨워. 네. 근데 템바 인젤 봐요나 겨울에 뭐냐고. 저 다나래자. Because his holiness is wondering because the Theravada definition of mind sati seems to be very similar to the sati in the context of this particular text that you are referring to seems to be almost identical definition developed on the basis of the sati in the context of one of the eightfold eightfold path. So in which case it's by virtue of its own definition, it is a wholesome state of mind.
Yes. But I wanted, the point is that I think Philippe had that right mindfulness on the tightrope.
So as we can see, there's much more. We still have, fortunately, 3 days, and we have already reached a little bit over 3 o'clock. And we're going to make a break here for tea, and so that Your Holiness also can retire for a good night's sleep. Thank you.